What are the best cybersecurity stories of 2023 for educating employees? That's what we're here to discuss today on session number 35 of the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. I'm Scott Wright, the Security Awareness Engagement Guy, along with a great panel of experts who will introduce themselves shortly. And I just wanted to let you know that the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum is brought to you by ClickArmor, which is the first fully interactive security awareness training platform that engages employees to retain knowledge with minimal time, effort, and cost for security management. Today is our 35th bi-weekly session, so we've been doing this for over a year and a half now. And I want to welcome back everyone who's participated in past sessions and also welcome those who joined us for the first time. We're streaming on Zoom, and we'll also be I think we're available on the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum community, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And wherever you are, if you haven't already, please put your location into the chat so we can see where we're coming from around the world. And I'll do a quick roll call here, see where people are coming from before we do the intros. So we've got Victoria, BC, North Carolina, Toronto, Jacksonville, Florida, Chicago, Montreal, Finland, Detroit, Stittsville, Ontario, and more from Chicago. And Thea, did you put your location in here?
Oh, I didn't. Sorry, one second. There we go.
All right, from not Denver, Oslo, Norway. there is somebody late from Denver, so excellent. Yeah, great representation globally. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan for a minute to do quick intros of the panelists, and then we'll get started.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another session. This afternoon, we've got Fleetus. Fleetus is a seasoned IT and security professional, currently a security operations manager. Beyond his expertise, he finds immense joy in sharing his passion for cybersecurity with others. Please welcome Fleetus. Thanks for joining us today. Next to Fleetus, we've got Thea. Thea is a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. In her current role as Director of Research for Praxis Security Labs, Thea now works on applying her experience to cybersecurity scenarios surrounding the human element. So thank you for joining us again, Thea.
Yeah.
And finally, we've got Sid. Where did Sid's bio go? We have too many bios. Sid is currently the head of IT at Greenpeace Canada and studying for the CISSP. He has worked in the nonprofit and corporate sectors and ran his own IT services business for over 15 years. So thank you again, Sid, for joining us. Good to see you again, my friend. I'm Ryan from ClickArmor, and Scott, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Yes, I'm Scott Wright. I'm founder of ClickArmor, and we created this cybersecurity awareness forum a year and a half ago just to help bring together the security managers who are passionate about security awareness and security culture. My background is 15 years teaching cybersecurity awareness before it was called cybersecurity, and before that did risk management and engineering, security engineering. So this is another fun session we're going to do to wrap up the year. I've covered a lot of stories. I actually co-host the Shared Security podcast with Tom Eston from Cleveland and Kevin Johnson from Jacksonville, Florida, where we have people from representing from us from Jacksonville on the call today. So yeah, we've got lots of stories that we could be covering, and I don't think there's any one right or wrong answer about what's the top story. But I asked all the panelists to bring their own story, talk about what's important about it, and what we can learn from it. I'm also going to just share my screen for a minute to let you know what we do with the results of these sessions. We do record them. We post them on our YouTube channel from ClickArmor. We also do transcripts. We do blog posts from them. And we also publish a quarterly CISO report on security awareness, which is helpful for communicating highlighting key issues for executives. And we also, as I've mentioned, have a website now for the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum that you can join for free. And it's a great place to comment on the videos, collaborate with people, and we'll be posting resources there as well. So those are things we hope you'll be able to get value from and share. So to start the session today, we're going to just sort of do a little bit of a roundtable. There's so many stories. I mean, weekly there are so many stories, but we just pulled a few that might be worth talking about as suggestions. And we, as I said, we've asked our panelists to sort of bring their own to talk about too. But in September there was the MGM ransomware incident that happened because of social engineering at I think it was the employee help desk level. We had Ontario hospitals here in Canada that were attacked by ransomware. Toronto Public Library. 23andMe was a big one. We've got some notes here on the screen that sort of highlight a little bit about what happened there. A little bit of mystery around that one. I think there will be more coming about it, but invite the panelists to comment on this and any of the others. Suncor is another major energy company that had been hit with ransomware, as well as a few other. These are actually mostly Canadian companies and organizations. But let's turn it over to the panel and see what kinds of choices they made around what are the most important news stories for security awareness. So who would like to go first? If you just want to raise your hand, we'll maybe go with Thea first because you have a little time commitment. So let's get started with your story.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so mine isn't on the list. So the one that really stood out for me this year was in August 23, the UK Electoral Commission attack. I don't know if people know about that. Basically, it was 40 million voters, anyone who had been registered to vote in the last 15 years in the UK, basically had all their data.
Pretty much the whole country, right?
Pretty much. I mean, it's certainly more than half of the population has been compromised. And I think, first of all, simply that number, over half the population's data has been compromised, is just insanity through, various things. And I think also it really highlighted the fact the amount of blind faith that a lot of the general public have in government's ability to keep their side of things safe from these kind of cyber attacks. I mean, and they, they discovered that this external threat actor had been in their systems for about 15 months, completely undetected, which is just obviously, again, it's almost unfathomable actually to think about. So they were certainly probably not in there even just for financial gain. They were probably up to something else. But I think it sparked, in a positive way, quite a high level of interest from voters in what are you doing about cybersecurity, which I think really shone more of a light on this isn't just about business. It's also about government. It's also about critical infrastructure. We're seeing more and more like hospitals, things that are actually directly killing people, not even indirectly, risking people's lives. This is how serious this is. And the other thing that I really want to highlight about it is that they had received what they call a cyber essentials audit some period before this, and they'd received an automatic failure from them. And yet they continue to operate. So if you're going to do these audits and assessments and say, well, actually, you're not operating securely, we've not actually got to the point where we thought about, okay, but then what do I do about that? Actually, there was no like, we better roll out some additional training. Who do we target in our, how do we do this? There was nothing. It was just like, oh, I failed. Okay, great. I'm just going to hang that on the wall, continue operating as usual until the worst thing happens. So yeah, that would probably be my top story.
Interesting. So anybody have any questions or comments on that story? Questions for Thea or comments around the story itself? I was thinking, it's important to, when you mention, everybody trusts the government, right? So stories about government breaches are really interesting in terms of how they are responding. Are they trying to cover up, or was there sort of evidence that, like you said, they've been there for a year and a half? It doesn't necessarily mean they knew about it for a year and a half, right? No. Most organizations don't know when there is malware in their networks for a long time. Fleetus, you could probably speak to that.
Yeah, I was going to say dwell time is normal. I mean, it wasn't until the last several years when ransomware and extortion has became the biggest threats where they actually just tell you they're there. For the longest time, they wanted to sit. I mean, you look at Verizon's data breach report, you've looked at Mandiant, they show that it can be 1 to 3 years that some people sit in people's environments undetected, depending on the industry, the sector. So not surprised about the 15 months, especially if there's a low and slow approach where they only come in once every week, once a month, just to make sure they keep persistence until they find what they want. And they
Mhm.
continue to do other phishing, social engineering, just to see what else they can gain while they keep their back door and their persistence in the environment. But it's fairly common. To share more stories about that as we go through this that are related to those. So
Nice. So was there
I would-
any
I want to add one more thing. The auditor gen to find this for you because they look for those, and all of a sudden when you start pulling access reports like what is this IP, what is this user account, and that's when your auditors can help you. That's when your GRC is helpful, is when you do those quarterly, monthly, semi-annually, or annual audits. You can find these things if you're looking in the right places and actually doing the audit versus just checking the box.
Well, the fact that then, you can probably detect them if you've got the right systems in place and the correct processes. The fact this is a government agency and it's to do with democracy, and you were in there 15 months and you didn't pick up on it.
Yeah.
It's even worse, actually.
I think another thing I wanted to pick up on your point, Theo, was Cyber Essentials. I'm not sure if everybody understands. Cyber Essentials is a standard within the UK that is required by essentially all suppliers to the UK government, I believe. If not, and as well the government, I'm sure, must walk the talk, right? But it's an interesting question as to why, they didn't do anything after they got that audit failure.
Yeah. What is their purpose if you're not going to act on? Yeah. But I feel like the industry has done that for a long time, where there's a problem, we've solved the problem, but we've not thought about the step after that necessarily. So we tend to move in these like blocks rather than trying to see maybe the long term.
Yeah. I also like to focus on the impact. So what do you think the impact of this particular breach is? It was in the elections area, so it could actually have been a nation state, right? Trying to obtain information that could be used for influencing future elections, for example, right? So we know that kind of thing does happen. I guess I'm not familiar with the story, so I don't know if any immediate impacts or specific impacts were discussed at all in the story.
No, I mean, not really. The reporting's been very sketchy on it. So even like the courts, which I mean, I'm assuming that there was some human factor involved in that, simply because 95% of incidents there's a human factor involved in that. But we still don't know. They've just simply called it a complex attack. So that, I mean, I'm either assuming that means we don't want to tell you or we don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Sid, would you like to go next with yours?
Hi. So I'd like to talk about the Okta breaches that started happening at the end of 2022 and kind of came to a head in October 2023 and then even November. Okta finally disclosed that all customer support accounts were exposed, and these are dangerous, highly privileged users, super admins of orgs, admins, and it just exposed emails, names, private information, but those are targets now. So mitigation, of course, I mean, people should, for those kinds of accounts, you should already think of least privilege, but these are admin accounts. Greater session timeouts, definitely multi-factor, but look at passkeys, on top of multi-factor with hardware keys, and avoiding SMS tokens and email tokens, which we know are easy to intercept. So, I mean, so this looks at cybersecurity education for users who are more highly privileged.
Right. So do you think that, I mean, in a typical case like this, where it doesn't seem like highly sensitive information may have been exposed. It was definitely, the breach occurred with sensitive roles, but it was, customer names, as you said, things like that. To me, the first thing that pops up is those customers' employees might be targeted, right?
Exactly.
With phishing attacks and things like
Yeah.
that could really be more successful. And there are so many organizations that use Okta for their identity management and logins, right?
Yeah,
Awesome.
So to reply to you, Scott, yeah, if they just get a couple of, if they send phishing email, whatever, and compromise those admin emails, they can then impersonate those users and infiltrate, and spearfish like directors, etc.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah. Anybody else have comments on that, the Okta stories?
I mean, I'll just add a little bit. We already talked about government. This is going back to the security firms. We've put trust that our security firms are following their own security best practices. They are complying, because just like the rest of us, we have regulatory requirements that we say we have attestation against. They have attestation as well, but it shows because Okta was involved in the casino attacks too. People forget that they were under the underpinning in almost all of those attacks. It didn't confirm, but I believe they were also impacted with the Clorox breach, which this gets back to what the SEC in the US is forcing you to do, the Security Exchange Commission, on how you do detection. So like this is where your government, your security firms having to get these alignments on, are we checking the boxes? And then here in the US, we don't really have good laws around breach reporting. So that's why the SEC came out with a requirement making some kind of materialism required of 4 days. Well, we all know that unless you've done the legwork before, your C levels don't know what a material loss is. They're going to spend 4 days discussing what material loss is. Just like joking aside, but unless this is why you push back and get your leadership teams with those tabletops that we talked about in other sessions, is what do we consider a material loss? And it doesn't just have to be a publicly traded company. Your small companies could do the same thing, just so they understand how to tell their private equity firms or their VCs, we had a material loss today. And here's why it is. So that's kind of where I was at. Sid stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to go through the Okta, but from that point of view, is it Okta underpins most of the breaches we've seen today, or identity access providers, we'll take Okta off the table, are your underpinning, because you let B2B, B2C connections with these attacks happen with your suppliers, your third party risk. So that's the lens that I've been looking at over the last 18 months, is they're not coming after the company themselves. They're coming after their providers. They're coming after their supply chains. They're coming after the people that connect into their system for HR or for billing or for accounting, or it's a security firm who has connections to your environment to do managed detection and response, or an MSSP, your managed service providers.
Yeah. So even though Sid used your story, do you have another story, Fleetus, that you can talk
I'll go a personal more story that I worked, not directly to the company I work with today, but just thinking about your endpoint. We forget about what sits on our endpoint. So for example, an executive admin that said, I don't need to worry about the fact that we got hit with ransomware. I have nothing sensitive on my laptop. It wasn't until we looked at their backup that they realized, what did they have on their desktop? A file that had all the C levels information in it. Their name, their address, their socials, their credit card numbers, their birthdays, they're all sitting on the desktop of this executive admin. And it wasn't until the recovery phase, when you recover the files on this person's box, that we determined now we have identity theft issues. We have potential loss to all of our executives, because this admin had a flat file sitting on their desktop, an Excel file, I believe, that had all this information just sitting there, unpassword protected as well, on her desktop. Nothing against the executive admin. That's just how she did business. She put a file there, but teaching your end users that what you have sitting on your box is just as important as what your controls are to allow people into your network. If I can get physical or logical access to your endpoint, your Mac, your Windows, etc., I can peruse your files. And it wasn't even named anything anonymous, even though we know obfuscation doesn't mean anything, because you can go just do regex to look for socials and other values on a box without even looking at file names. So that's where I would come at, is just understanding the data resilience and security behind the user. Because we talked about it numerous times here on what is a user. So most of our attacks, and I will attest, 100% of incidents are human related. Someone had to configure the system, or someone had to click or give the information. Every attack starts with a human. Even though automation's in play, a human still wrote the automation.
Yeah.
Still did the point and click. Today. Tomorrow that could change with ML, AI, et cetera. But today, a human was involved in every single. We risk accepted something, we configured something, or we provided information to someone.
Yeah, I really like that story because it sort of illustrates, as you said, it's not just the average employee awareness. You know, if there are people with security responsibilities doing configurations, they need to understand, you know, the risks around what their job entails. And this is something that I work with quite often when I'm doing, you know, compliance work with different organizations, because we're now doing role-based security training. And that role-based training might involve, you know, how do you make sure that your configurations are done securely? So really, really important story. Yeah, thanks for that, Fleetus.
Then
Anybody
just
else have a comment?
One more little piece to it real quick is just,
Yeah.
what does the access creep look like? I may trust you as an employee and I give you way too many provisions, but do I go in and clean up the rights that I gave you the first day I hired you? And you're now a VP. Do you still have perpetual birth rights that I gave you when you were an analyst or an engineer in my company before I put you into leadership? Because I may trust you as a person, but if you get compromised, if you have full access to 12 different systems, the adversary is going to find those systems because of your access. So just going back to everything we talked about, access control, auditing, looking for access creep, looking for other things. Like statistically, I think one more stat is like a finance company on day one, you have access to over 1,000 sensitive files by their birthrights, just on day one. And that's day one. As they work, they get more access.
Yep, that's great. Any other comments?
I think there's a question in the chat for Thea. It says, Thea, what's your take on human behavior and influencing change based on Fleetus's comments?
That was quite a broad range of comments there, Fleetus. I'm going to see which ones I recall off the top of my head. So the thing about access control, which you absolutely have to do, right? Why are you having this wide, you know, breadth of threat if you know, people don't need it and so on? I think one of the issues that we have is that IT-based changes that we make do not consider the type of communication you're having with people. So simply revoking somebody's access all of a sudden because they've gotten promoted is like, I don't trust you. And that's not, you know, that's not great. But having that, if you do some proper communication with them, we need to limit this. This also, you know, limits how at risk you are of becoming a victim of something. You know, and we're doing this to protect you and everybody else. You're still able to do those kind of changes without sort of damaging culturally, potentially. You know, and never say, I trust you, but if you say but, they forget everything you said before the but. They just listen to whatever you said after the but. So yeah, I think communication is absolutely key in all of this. And I also really agree with the idea that it's not just the like an end user at the end of an email who's in human resources, people doing coding, secure coding. And I feel like some of the security awareness training has forgotten about those people. You know, it's just like we're just teaching people about phishing. No, we need secure everything. And as you pointed out, Fleetus, it may be everything may be automated, but it's all from people. And even, you know, MLs and so on, they're based on people input. So we need to have security built into our behaviors. And that's, yeah, true.
Excellent feedback. Thank you, Thea.
Yeah. Ryan, did you bring a story?
I brought, so from that list that we kind of put together in the deck, I have the, from a privacy point of view, I'm bringing the 23andMe story, just because it touches a lot of different aspects of cybersecurity, personal privacy, you know, what's out there and what companies maybe should be doing more to protect, you know, our data. So, you know, first and foremost, you know, it's a small breach, but I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. We may learn more, and I don't even think the whole breach was disclosed properly. But it came from just, you know, credential stuffing, which is just password reusing, which, you know, first comes down to us as users, you know, making sure that we should be using more complex passwords. We should be using password managers. We should definitely be using two-factor authentication. And, you know, one of the disappointing parts that I saw was, you know, again, two-factor was promoted after the breach, to users by 23andMe. And so again, I understand that we have a responsibility as a user to protect our data, but I believe as a company, this is where organizations that are collecting such key pieces of our personal information, such as our genetic code, they should be probably, in my mind, doing more to protect our data from such a simple attack vector, right? So, what can we learn from this? Well, we can learn that, obviously, we should be doing more to protect ourselves and, using those password managers, ensuring 2FA is on every account, and being very mindful of the information that we upload. I'm a 23andMe member. This was, 7 or 8 years ago, when the world was a very different place, and I was curious about genetic information and family lineage, like many others were. And so I was gifted the package, and I did it. And it's I've learned quite a bit from it. I've even discovered that I had family members out there I didn't know of. And that's the story of many people. And so there's all these great positives that you connect with people and learn so much more. But the negative is my genetic code is sitting on a server that apparently is only a credential stuff away from it being exposed to the greater population. So now you have to kind of step back and think, well, if attacks are more common and more prevalent, what should I do with my information? So it's like, now, I've learned that I can go and download my genetic code from 23andMe. I can close my account, which means they'll delete it, and I can kind of get my rights back. And I think that's kind of my takeaway in my lesson is, let's make sure that we've got the right passwords in place and password managers and 2FAs and all those things that we know, in security awareness basics. But then let's learn about those websites that we have decided to share to, and what can we do from a privacy and protection point of view to get that data back and ensure that they've deleted a copy of that data and we won't be a part of the next breach. Right? Because just because this first 6.9 million happened, that was my wake-up call to be like, what? My wife and I'm going to pull us off, and maybe this is not something we're going to do, because until I have more confidence, it's like saying I'm not just going to leave my credit card up on a open website and hope that no one uses it. So that's my story. That's kind of my privacy focus and pitch and view on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about how permanent is a particular breach. Like, I mean, once something is released, is there value in trying to close it down or
I can get a new
data?
email address, right? But I can't get a new genetic code. I mean, yes, I mean, we might be just a few years away where I can, but also what can that genetic code be used for?
Yeah.
With AI and everything else. That's scary. I mean, I watch movies like this is.
Yeah. Anybody else have comments on Ryan's 23andMe story?
Yeah, I think it's an important theme this year, is empowering people to understand it's your data. It's not just the IT guy's job to mind it. It's yours. It's your information. You are going to be victimized if something happens to it. So yeah, I think that was a really important point, Ryan.
I just wanted to focus again on multi-factor. It's interesting that a company like that hadn't implemented it, but I've seen credit unions, pharmacies in the US and Canada who didn't have multi-factor for a long time. So they're open to credential stuffing in the same way, or they were.
Yeah. And it's actually, I think it comes, it's very closely related to a comment that Anthony made in the chat, saying that, executives, when you're talking to them about these things, don't want to hear the tech jargon and terminologies, multi-factor authentication. Most of them do know, but I've actually recently spoken with executives that didn't. They weren't necessarily in the security role, but it is important to talk to people without being too technical and having too much jargon, just because it will put up barriers. People start to realize or think that, I'm not going to understand the rest of this discussion, so I have better things to do. So really important that we do have to make sure that those factors are put in place, the multi-factor authentication, the things that we know. And we have to learn how to educate or communicate with executives on the risks around or managing the risks using these technologies. What are the technologies going to do to reduce the risks? So great points. I'm going to share a story that is actually around the use of, or the exposure of data because a ransomware wasn't paid. So this was Los Angeles Unified School District in October. And so the announcement was made in October. I think the actual attack was more in the spring. But basically, the attackers decided, okay, well, we're going to post this stuff publicly now. And it's a risk that we often mention when we're talking about training, but people don't really get it. And this story, I think, helps highlight, the risks of ransomware beyond just loss of operational capability, right? Ransomware locks you up and prevents you from getting things done. It might prevent you from being able to access people's information legally where they need to have it. So when you actually take, the story of what a ransomware attack looks like, and you say, well, once upon a time, ransomware attacks used to be just locking up your system, and then they expanded into, spreading before they actually trigger so that they lock up as many systems as possible on a network. And then they decided, hey, you know what? We've got access to all this data before we encrypt it. Let's steal it and then use it for extortion later. And we tell that story sometimes a little bit too quickly. And I think people don't realize that that is a huge risk of ransomware. And it's another reason why you really, really don't want to get a ransomware infection. It's not just the loss of operational capability. There are privacy risks now associated with every ransomware attack. I was in a tabletop exercise several months ago where, essentially the first order of business was to determine if there had been any data exfiltration when the attack happened or just before the lockup happened. So it becomes part of the whole security program. Anybody have any comments on that?
I mean, I mentioned it earlier. I mean, that's where your data resilience comes back in, is understanding what data is where, so you understand the impact when it is breached. And I say breached in multiple ways. Is it encrypted? Is it stolen? Is it exfilled? Is it copied? Is it disseminated? So like, it's just understanding your data resilience plan of how you're going to handle that prior to the event. So you're proactively documenting, doing data classification, data labeling, and you monitor when that data moves. Like knowing if it's sitting on the executive's desktop, if it leaves the executive desktop, some trigger should file. Or if it's in this folder, it should only be in this folder. If that folder gets cloned, copied, or moved, there's another trigger to let you know that the data is now in movement. So sometimes just catching those triggers can help with some of these detections and response capabilities, because now you know that the data is moving or has been cloned or has been copied, or it's been encrypted before they get to the rest of the environment. So you can segment east-west traffic. So don't allow your assets to talk to each other. Put segmentation as much as you can feasibly within your company.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I mean, these are recurring themes, and I think it's great to just reinforce them. So, all right. I think we've done one round of the panelists. Do we have any, actually, Ernie's mentioning in the chat that there were insurance companies making executive teams more accountable for knowing and what is going on from a security standpoint. Yeah, I mean, even I think the SEC has just passed some regulations in the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, where boards have to disclose more about the risks around their organization from a cyber point of view, and that means the executives, all of public companies anyway, need to become more open in discussing those things. John mentioned his favorite story is the MGM breach. Ryan, actually, I think you had a good discussion with a journalist about this at one time. Do you want to just sort of explain it in a short blurb?
Yeah. So the MGM breach, it was a good old-fashioned social engineering attack, which just I guess excites me. It's just, and I went and did a podcast interview about it, just kind of breaking it down. Quick overview: it was a help desk kind of social engineering for credentials. Two-factor was bypassed over the phone. They got Okta administrator rights, and then once they were in, they were traversing around at a record pace to get access to the system. So, there was a lot of misconfiguration, and again, some people are pointing the finger at Okta and different things, but, I always like to go back all the way out to how it started. And, we can have all the systems in place, and we can have all the alerts and the monitoring and everything for a massive casino that, has more money at any given time than any bank, in this world. And so, how did they get in? Well, that was social engineering, and that was through going through a LinkedIn profile, finding the right person, impersonating that person, and utilizing, kind of a first level offshore help desk to manipulate your way through. And so, again, we have to remember that when we talk about security awareness, this is my takeaway on this one, is we have to look at the entire chain, right? And that goes third party, that goes to your temp staff, that goes to the summer students you have in, to Fleetus's point, as soon as you walk through the door, you have access to millions of data points, and if you are given credentials, of a super user, for example, you are even a bigger threat. And that's where it's like, did that person need that access? And it all comes into play. But guess what? It was that help desk staff that didn't get the proper training to know that they were being manipulated in a social engineering attack. So that's a great story, and I think we learned a lot from it. And there's going to be a lot of ramification from it, and that could be one of the ones that becomes a movie one day.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I'd like to see that some of these made into movies for sure.
Yeah,
I agree. I think a lot of these will turn into documentaries, movies, or plot lines, because we've already seen it with the physical security piece. You got the entire oceans thing. So showing the cyber pieces, which Ocean started doing in theirs, and you see that. But the other thing too is I talked about it briefly, is we've got to watch our integrations with our Teams and our Slacks. We get very comfortable setting up B2B connections and then assuming that we're fine. So what I preach, and one of my GRC folks is on this call, and they've probably heard me say this, is it normal for Fleetus to send this type of message to me? Like, learning very quickly when I communicate, is this the right verbiage that Fleetus would say? Like, does Fleetus usually send this in a Slack message, or is this an email? Does Fleetus normally call? Like, what is the persona of the person you're working with? Has my vendor ever asked me to provide this information in the past? And if so, is this how they've asked for that information? So it's the knowledge transfer and the knowledge base article that you give your help desk helps them understand this is a normal ask from this type of vendor. This is not a normal ask from this type of vendor. And it helps you understand what's going on when you can teach them to do like the 3-second or sing happy birthday, count to 3, put your hands behind your back before you click or do like these little breathing techniques that we've talked in other sessions. Like, slowing down is hard, but we're humans. We have intuition, we have intellect, we have the ability to stop and process, versus the computer, which is just going to process the 1 and 0, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other stories? If not, I'm going to ask the panel I just asked in the chat, but I would like to understand if anybody feels that any of the stories from this year that we heard of were overblown. Like, was there something that was, highlighted and run with the media, but really was not a big deal? I have one in mind, but I'd like to hear if anybody else has one. All right. So the one I'm thinking of is the risk called juice jacking. Anybody heard of that? Right. Where you're at risk of using anybody's or borrowing a USB cord or cable to connect your phone to power or something. And so the idea is you can now buy malicious cables that have been created with the intent of actually scanning whatever device is plugged into it and exploiting the device as well. And it was released as almost a bulletin, I think, by, I don't know if it was the CISA or FBI at one point, saying beware of juice jacking. But it's it's a risk, but it's a very, very almost opportunistic one. How do you target somebody with a cable, right? I mean, you can do it, but it's, I think, not as big an issue as some of the other ones that we would love to be able to educate people on more readily. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It becomes a little buzzword type mentality, right? And I think, unfortunately, we saw a lot of that this year with AI as well. So I think I'd probably give a vote for AI might be the overblown or underreported a cybersecurity news story. It's we're coming up with all these terrible ways that AI is going to be a threat to us, but it could be a lot of just unnecessary worry, and it could be a lot of hype because it sells clicks, right? And I think that's what the juice jacking one was definitely kind of a how do we get consumer level people interested or paying attention or clicking on this or buying a new product, and it comes down to their phones and their devices. And so I think that's a great point, Scott. It was probably something that was that we shouldn't necessarily be so worried about, because I don't think there's a ton of people out there trying to jack our charging ports.
So I will give a little bit. I'm on the fence with this because I have worked and been part of cases where this has kind of happened, not in the way that the FCC said it. The person that set up a portable charging station at like a fair and a playground and let people charge, and they targeted people. It was a targeted attack. They knew this person would be there. They knew this person would likely want to charge. So I see that as an opportunity, like a targeted attack that is happening. Airports also scare me because there's a lot of charging places that could easily pop up by someone passing through in an airport. So I'm hesitant with using the airport, just like I use an adapter when I charge on a plane. I don't know how well that plane is taking care of its adapter. I assume that's just me being paranoid. But airports in general is where I would probably say this could happen to a normal consumer. Everything else is going to be a target. I'm going to set up a pod. I'm going to set up something else to try to target that I know an elected official's coming through and I want access to their device, like we think Pegasus. Or I'm going to try to target something. It's going to be a target. It's not opportunistic. It's not going to be someone's going to spend the money to stage this, because this goes back to the days when we did USB drops. Like we could put malicious bat files on a USB that would auto run. So we put data blockers on the USBs. They just moved it to your.
Unfortunately, for tools like Pegasus and some of the others now, you don't even need that physical contact anymore. And you don't, I mean, there's zero-click deployment methods that are happening left, right, and center for these devices. So, I mean, we've moved on from some of that physical intercept stuff, but it's still a valid point that it is one of the still more common used interceptors out there for cyber espionage.
Awesome. I'm just going to shift gears for 1 minute and take a moment to talk about ClickArmor, just to let people know, immersing your employees into relevant and educational stories is actually pretty easy within the ClickArmor platform. So the whole idea of using stories to engage people and immerse them into a risk situation is really powerful. So this is something that we do at ClickArmor with our 3-minute challenges, as well as assessments within the foundational training and our ongoing assessments. So this is just something I wanted to highlight for people. If you're interested, reach out to Ryan or myself and get a demo and just see a little bit more about what we can do within the ClickArmor platform. So I want to just finish up by talking about predictions. Maybe not part of our story theme, but it is the end of the year, and we have some, pretty knowledgeable people on the panel here. So wanted to just give them a chance to speak up and say, what do you think we're going to see in the next year when it comes to security awareness or cyber in general that hopefully we'll be able to talk about from an awareness perspective.
So I have something coming out of this, so I'll just speak to it. It's like, and I briefly talked about it at the beginning of this, is compliance versus security. I think you're going to see more companies who take and start separating those two, because we've always said, I have compliance, so I am secure, or I have security, so I'm compliant. So I think there's going to be a good elimination. You're going to have more privacy officers, more data officers come into play. You're going to see more C-levels getting involved on what is our compliance requirements versus our security technology versus what is our technology back to our compliance. So I think you're going to see a lot more focus as we move into 24 on that. And again, the data resilience, the data backup, how do we manage those compliance and security to make sure we still protect that data, no matter where it's at? If it's in transit, it's at rest, it's on an endpoint, it's on a server, it's in a SaaS tool, your software as a service, or if it's in your private cloud or your data center.
Nice. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I've been trying to educate people in the sense that, there's a maturity hierarchy almost to say, compliance is the first step that people usually take to get the bare minimum. And it is in a way, it's a scalable way of minimally managing risk, right? You can just point to grid and say, if we do these things, we'll have something in place, better than nothing, right? But there is the whole idea of managing risk beyond that and constant improvement. So I really like that observation, Fleetus. Any other predictions?
I mean, mine comes down to, I'd say probably that I'd see a larger shift of attacks continuing to be posed against the human element. And I know, Scott, this is exactly why ClickArmor exists in the first place from your perspective. And as we see the advancement in AI and monitoring tools and faster computer processing power, quantum computing, and everything that we're moving towards, we're going to continue to lock down and secure our systems and everything else that we find very important, right? We've all moved to secure clouds. We've all moved to, offsite this. We have done everything we can to protect our data, but we've still lacking when it comes to protecting our people. And so my biggest kind of fear / prediction is that we're going to see in a large kind of critical infrastructure kind of failure in North America because of a human focused attack. And this is where we've been trending. This is where the state actors have been trending. They've been making people their targets, and it all comes down to what we share and what we kind of arm ourselves with knowledge to try and to stay ahead of these. So I think we have to put our focus on our people and not leave them behind. So that's my prediction.
I'm going to follow Ryan, because I think my thoughts relate a lot closely to this, obviously, but I actually think we're going to have what I would call an AI distraction year. I mean, AI kind of disrupted and a little more than distraction, but I think as things die down, there's going to be this desire among executives to say, we still have to explore how we can leverage AI, or what are we doing with AI? We need an AI strategy. And I think that's distracting from some of the foundational risk management stuff that we yet haven't figured out. So that's my prediction. Sid?
So I will post a link. This is the National Cyber Threat Assessment 2023-2024 from, and Ryan had touched on some of these. I want to add one more, which is cryptocurrency, decentralized finance. I think I think that will become a target. And if you scroll down further, there are 5 points there.
Okay, great.
So specifically, banking will become different, and decentralized finance will become a target.
Okay, neat.
Yeah.
Blockchain.
And we've already seen the prevalence of that happening. I mean, celebrities and large players. I think Mark Cuban just hit the news for his wallet being hacked, and it's going to continue to happen. We know that. I think the largest revenue generator for the state of North Korea is attacking crypto wallets, stealing cryptocurrency, and then utilizing that on the black market to purchase weapons and fuel. Right. This is how the world works now. Is if we build a system, it's going to come under attack. And if we're starting to shift funds to this imaginary virtual, world, we can only expect it to be the next kind of level of attack and playing field. So that's a great point, Sid. As far as like critical infrastructure, scares me, and then the collapse of crypto and where that money goes and what can be done with it is also a big scare.
Yeah, and Shelley just posted something in the chat too, which is really, pretty insightful with respect to, we're moving people back from remote to the office, and most organizations are doing some kind of hybrid, but that's going to be even more difficult to manage risks in than the remote, right? We kind of almost had it better with remote access, but that's going to be a big one for sure.
That's a good point, because so many people were connected, but remotely were kind of kept at an arm's length of kind of, the critical infrastructure. And now with the attack vectors moving back to humans, if we put them all back together on that server, on that home network, that just makes Fleetus's job 100 times
and
more
it's almost like when you join an organization for the first time, everybody's new, you don't really know who should or shouldn't be there. And so you're going back into the office after a pandemic. I guess that guy joined a few months ago, right?
And
And
that's something we talked before is like if you did a mass hire, any hiring, and let's just say you don't require badges because you're not large enough, you don't have a regulatory require, I could walk in and say
Oh
whoever
yeah.
I want to be. Unless you've never seen if you've seen a picture of me, maybe, but like I can say, I'm John Smith, you hired me for this team. And if I know that John Smith works for this company and was hired, I can walk in and be John Smith. It's just a little recon that comes with that. Because I told a friend I was studying risk management and he said that was risky. I replied, it's only if I miscalculate the punchline. So
Yeah, I just want to add in our Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver offices, we now have we've allocated some of these areas as hot desks. So there are all sorts of people coming in, and you know, they're not they're not constantly sitting in a certain place. So
Yeah.
as was said, you know, we don't know who all these people are.
And unfortunately, Greenpeace, I mean, you guys are a higher target for corporate espionage, insider threats. I mean, I feel like our entire insider threats course was came to fruition because of thinking about, you know, your position at Greenpeace and how, you know, malicious the inside can be. So that's it's a valid point about recognizing our teams and understanding our people. And there's a lot of, you know, head scratching about who's that person. I mean, it could be a very interesting year for sure.
yeah. Great comment from Ernie about, you know, some of these things are just highlighting the fact that it's almost impossible to overblow security and privacy because, you know, I'm concerned that we're using too much FUD, you know, when we're trying to sell ClickArmor, but the FUD really only applies if people are already doing more than enough.
Yeah.
and they're not. So I think we're justified in
I
some
know
cases.
when reading that again, it's not a matter of, you know, if, it's a matter of when. Like, it's such a cliche line, but it's a statistically proven and backed up line, and that's why we have the cyber threat, you know, assessment that Sid just posted, and that's why we have all of these different, you know, publications of all the data and all the things. You know, ransomware is continuously on the rise. It's just shocking, and until I think we go all the way back until there's better laws around breach disclosure, especially in Canada. You know, we're not even going to know the full extent of the cybercrime that is happening in Canada. So how do we try and get ahead of it? How do we train our people when we don't even know exactly what is happening because the laws are protecting companies from, you know, just disclosing all the time. So there's a lot I think we need to get, you know, in place and to have a better shot at this. But whew, what a great year, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen, for putting the acronym in there, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. I may have used it. I try, and when I'm doing podcasts, I always try to make sure that we expand the acronyms, but I feel like everybody knows stuff here, so they're also smart. Okay, folks, we're just about at the end. I just wanted to let you know, I wasn't really going to announce this, but I thought we should probably start now and build some momentum for the next year. The next session is going to be January 10th, 2024. And it's going to be on, actually, I didn't put that in here. There we are. Number 35, the problem of employees using free stuff from the internet. You know, we touch on this sometimes, but it's really a sort of an issue of the acceptable use policies that we have. And what are we doing that might be, you know, causing people to go out and use dangerous things, or what can we do to actually help them work within our acceptable use policies?
I wanted to thank everyone who's been coming out all year. I think our panelists who have been spending their time and their afternoons with us on Wednesdays and contributing to work. We've had a great group of panelists all year. I look forward to seeing you guys all back next year. Scott, thank you so much for the work you've put in this year and getting this together and keeping us on a bi-weekly schedule. And I look forward to 2024.
Amazing. Thanks so much, folks. Look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great holiday. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you all.